A collection of illustrated fairy tales. Once upon a time, there was a prince and princess who lived in a grand castle. They lived happily, but the prince and princess wanted to have some adventures. A collection of illustrated fairy tales. One day, they heard about a dragon who lived in a nearby cave. The prince and princess wanted to find the dragon and defeat it, so they set off on a journey. A collection of illustrated fairy tales. They searched high and low but couldn't find the dragon anywhere. Until one day, they stumbled upon a meadow full of beautiful flowers. There, in the middle of the meadow, was the dragon. A collection of illustrated fairy tales. The prince and princess were in awe. They asked the dragon why it was in the meadow, and the dragon told them its story. The dragon explained that it used to be a fierce creature who caused chaos and destruction. But one day, it stumbled upon this meadow and its beauty filled the dragon with peace and joy. A collection of illustrated fairy tales. Suddenly, a giant snake appeared and threatened to hurt the dragon. The prince and princess bravely fought off the snake and saved the dragon. The dragon was so grateful and offered them a wish. A collection of illustrated fairy tales. The prince and princess asked for stories. And so the dragon granted them a collection of illustrated fairy tales, perfect for parents who love to share stories with their children. A collection of illustrated fairy tales. A collection of illustrated fairy tales. The prince and princess thanked the dragon and continued on their journey. They soon found themselves in a dark and mysterious forest. The trees were tall and the air was thick with fog. A collection of illustrated fairy tales. The prince and princess walked through the forest, looking for a way out. But the more they walked, the more lost they became. They were about to give up when they heard a strange noise. A collection of illustrated fairy tales. The prince and princess looked up and saw a giant spider. It was spinning a web across the forest, trapping anyone who tried to pass. The prince and princess had to find a way to get past the spider and out of the forest. A collection of illustrated fairy tales. The prince and princess tried to talk to the spider, but it just kept spinning its web. They had to find a way to get past the spider without getting caught in its web. A collection of illustrated fairy tales. The prince and princess tried to think of a way to get past the spider. They had to be clever and brave if they were going to make it out of the forest alive. A collection of illustrated fairy tales. A collection of illustrated fairy tales. The prince and princess tried to think of a way to get past the spider. They had to be clever and brave if they were going to make it out of the forest alive. A collection of illustrated fairy tales. Then, the prince and princess had an idea. They went to the library and checked out a book on spiders. The book had all sorts of information on spiders and their behavior. The prince and princess read it from cover to cover. A collection of illustrated fairy tales. The prince and princess learned about the habits of spiders and the different techniques that people use to get past them. It was all very interesting, but the prince and princess still couldn't get past the spider. A collection of illustrated fairy tales. The prince and princess were starting to give up hope. Maybe they would never make it out of the forest. But then, they had one last idea. They went back to the forest and watched the spider. They paid close attention to how it moved and what it did. A collection of illustrated fairy tales. Finally, the prince and princess figured it out. They used a mirror to distract the spider and then quickly ran past it. They made it out of the forest alive, but there was one thing missing in their plan: the prince and princess hadn't expected the spider to be so fast. A collection of illustrated fairy tales. A collection of illustrated fairy tales. The prince and princess were relieved to be out of the forest, but they were still lost. They decided to keep walking until they found something familiar. Soon, they stumbled upon a meadow. It was the same meadow they had seen before, with the dragon in the middle. A collection of illustrated fairy tales. The prince and princess were surprised to see the dragon again. They asked it for help and the dragon agreed. It told them that it could help them find their way out of the forest, but only if they could answer one question. A collection of illustrated fairy tales. The dragon asked the prince and princess what they had learned from their journey. The prince and princess thought for a moment and then answered. They had learned that even the most difficult obstacles can be overcome with courage, cleverness, and a little bit of luck. A collection of illustrated fairy tales. The dragon was pleased with their answer and granted them their wish. It showed them the way out of the forest, and the prince and princess were finally able to make it home. A collection of illustrated fairy tales. The prince and princess returned to their castle, where they lived happily ever after. They kept the collection of illustrated fairy tales with them, and shared the stories with their children and grandchildren. A collection of illustrated fairy tales. The prince and princess never forgot their journey and the lessons they had learned. They knew that with courage, cleverness, and a little bit of luck, anything was possible.